For the next few videos I'm working on, I've been looking at the world of fashion with sociology and psychology. For this, I've been looking for credible research to back up any claims or anything that I want to say about these things. Science that proves the psychological effects, credible people discussing these ideas and backing up these claims. Except it's been alarmingly difficult. In particular, I've been finding articles that make psychological claims, and then they cite those claims, so I get really excited and I click on the citations to see if that's a better journal to read, or even just to make sure that the article itself is actually credible. And then it takes me to an online shopping website. Not anything backing up some kind of psychological claim. And then I'll do the next source. Maybe they messed up, they linked the wrong one, understandable, and it's a different online shopping site. So needless to say, it's been hard to vet sources for these videos, and it kind of got me thinking, what is it that is necessary to establish credibility in these fields? And why is there such a lack of credibility in these fields? So let's talk about that. Now, fashion does present some unique problems and solutions when it comes to these kinds of discussions. On one hand, there are certain things that you would think need some kind of basis in science or history or something. But then on the other hand, do you really need to be an expert to talk about fashion? I mean, it's something that we all participate in every single day. All of us have been cultured in fashion since the day we were born and make decisions to do with it, and we make those decisions somewhat rationally. We have a background, we have a basis, and we're always interacting with it. Fashion also isn't a science. In order to be knowledgeable about it, in order to be acknowledged by prestigious organizations with fashion, you don't need a formal education. You just need to have put in the time and the energy to be knowledgeable about it. In some ways, you can learn more by interacting with society and different in-groups and magazines than by trying to sit down and read a textbook that very well might be outdated. With such an informal field, what does it take to be credible? It doesn't help that the general field of fashion is very much so seen down on in general. I mean, that's something I've looked into before, but especially when you then are adding a scientific element. It's already niche and kind of looked down on to study fashion, but especially to then do the psychology of fashion or the sociology of fashion. As a result, there's just a lack of resources in this field. There's so many questions that you might ask that no one really has answered with a credible backing, just assumptions or pauvering or the best that people can do. And there's also a whole extra dose to be added of sexism. Are certain things not seen as credible due to sexism, or is it just that they don't exist because of sexism? Again, so many questions that I had going into the research for this. I also need to break this down into kind of two sections: sociology and psychology. They both have very different bases, and we're first going to start with sociology. Sociology is described as, quote, the study of social life, social change, and the social causes and consequences of human behavior. In my classes, I've seen it described as the web of things that connects people and society. So it gets everything from economy to social hierarchies to values, religion, family dynamics. All of it is kind of studied and under the umbrella of sociology. So when it comes specifically to fashion, I think of sociology and fashion describing how fashion informs the world around us and how the world around us informs fashion. This one actually isn't as hard to find a basis in when it comes to the credibility argument. Because fashion has reflected so many big social movements and can be chronicled fairly easily, there's a lot of history and documentation to work with. From large cultural movements to the differences in how race and class play into these different fashion movements and styles. This gives a lot to base credibility off of. It's very similar to making any historical or sociology related argument. If you have a basis in history and you have a trend and you can relate these two clearly, then you have a fairly credible argument. To make this easier, I'm laying out an example. So one is how beauty standards have changed to reflect a society's ideals, and specifically beauty standards around weight. The one that I found, from the 15th and 19th centuries, thinness was not the beauty standard. Being thin was associated with, quote, poverty and the weakness of disease and old age. It also suggested spiritual poverty and moral insufficiency. Then we see a switch in views after that. Something from the 1970s already talking about being larger and larger weights now, quote, the accepted sign of mental slavery, weakness of will, neurosis, or bondage to ethnic traditions that are dependent on starchy foods as a staple diet. Even worse, fatness suggests unhealthiness and early death, just as hollow cheeks and bony frames used to do. Each of these has to do with the larger society's view of health, of what it takes to work for something, and that the ideal standard is something you should have to work for. And we also throw in some ideas about poverty and class and immigration. I was comfortable making these claims because I could find a reasonable amount of sources. As late as last year, as early as pictures of Roman gods to back up these claims. I don't necessarily need a degree in sociology or fashion to write or discuss these ideas, as long as I'm credibly sourcing materials. A mix of primary and secondary documents, publications both from the time and of historians now discussing them, and it's somewhat peer-reviewed. Again, I'm finding different articles that agree throughout time, so I'm comfortable making that claim. With sociology and fashion, you can find a credible author based off of them making sure to find reliable sources as you would with any other historical topic. A credible author just has to have credible research. But then we get to our second half, psychology and fashion. If sociology is the whole of society and our relationship with fashion, then psychology and fashion has to do more with the individual and an individual's effect on others. Or at least that's how I see it. Let's start easy. If you want to find an expert in the topic, there's a degree in psychology and fashion from the London College of Fashion. If you just want a certificate, for roughly £200, you can get one from Fashion is Psychology. And other options would be having someone with a formal background in psychology, then having an emphasis in fashion, or dedicating their research to fashion. But again, what if you're just looking for a credible author? Or what if you just want to be able to make somewhat credible claims? We can all agree that you definitely need a degree in psychology to talk about mental health diagnoses or what it takes to treat those. But do we need a psychologist to tell us the exact percentage that going outside and taking a walk will make you feel happier? Or can we trust hundreds of years of human experience and advice telling us to do so? Do we need psychologists to back up the claim that wearing clothes that you find flattering will increase your confidence? Or can we just reasonably make that claim on our own? This is the more complicated of the two. I don't think there really is a correct answer. It's very much so a case-by-case basis, but that's kind of an annoying answer to give. So let's delve into that a little bit more. When it comes to things that I'll take into my own personal thought process, I feel like my bar is lower. Someone telling me red makes you feel more confident? Okay, cool, I'll wear red at competitions now. Seems legit. But I wouldn't say that on camera. I wouldn't write about it in an article because it's just hearsay. It's just something that someone said and feels like it's not complete bullshit. So my line for a video is that maybe that combined with research that shows that in video games, being a red character or the red team makes you more aggressive, more likely to win. Then with those caveats, I would say maybe you should start wearing red to competitions. But that's my bar. And coming at it from the lens of someone who acts as an author, it concerns me that there is not a clear bar for other authors. That I have to go through and vet each author and see whether they're likely to be making a good faith argument or not. And that gets really complicated and sticky. To say the least, it's frustrating. On so many of these topics, there just simply isn't research. It's not that someone isn't looking into the topic enough or that an author might be lazy. It's that there isn't research to be found. You might have a sprinkle of evidence and try and go further from there, but you very well could be taking a shot in the dark. And not of an author's trying to be unreliable or trying to push a certain narrative, but just that it doesn't exist. It creates a very interesting dilemma to me as someone who likes to just kind of discuss these issues. On one hand, it doesn't fully matter. It's fashion. It's what you put on your body, and if it works for you, then who really cares? But again, what if you're trying to say something or give advice or do any number of things? There's just not research on these topics. It's something similar to the frustration I got when I was really into historical dress YouTube, that there's so many misconceptions and things that we just don't know because fashion has largely been seen as an unimportant woman's work. And part of me can't help but think that this is likely an extension of that. We don't really value it, so we don't really look into it, and we wouldn't know if we're missing anything. There's later videos that I also want to make about author bias in general, and I think this also puts in an interesting dilemma. There's just so many complicated situations when there's just a lack of information. So credibility and fashion. I don't really know. In some ways, everyone can be credible about these topics, and in some ways, no one can be credible in these topics. So there's my non-answer about a topic that maybe doesn't really matter. But I hope you enjoyed, and I hope it makes you think about the authors that you read about. Or maybe the next video will make you think that. Who's to say? Not me. My bangs did get messed up during the video. Have a great day.